to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, this is Collett Smart. I'm a psychologist and a teacher, and I'm your host on Raising Teens. As a parent, I know that raising a teenager can be an incredible, exhilarating, and joyous journey. It can also be confusing and really lonely at times. On this podcast, we are going to be joined by well-known experts where we chat about some of the most common questions that I get asked about raising teenagers in my own work. Our episodes are jam-packed with support so that you can get on with the job that you do best. That is, connecting with, supporting, and loving your teen. Michelle Mitchell is an award-winning speaker and best-selling parenting author. She has been termed a teenage expert by the media and is sought after for her compassionate and grounded advice on parenting. Michelle started her career as a teacher, but soon discovered a special interest in well-being. She left teaching in 2000 and founded Youth Excel, a health promotion charity which delivered tailor-made life skills programs and services to thousands of young people and their families each year. Today, she uses her experience to write and speak in schools, community events, and through media. I need to stop here and stress that because this episode covers conversations surrounding self-harm, you may want to pause here and listen to the content first before letting your teens listen in. I understand that this can be a very intense topic, so I will be finishing this episode with some very practical do's and don'ts. Please stick around until then. We'll also have some links to extra resources in the description. Hi, Michelle. Thanks so much for joining me on Raising Teens. I am so grateful that you are comfortable talking about this topic on self-harm. Michelle, when you mentioned you were writing a book on self-harm, why teens do it and what parents can do it, I think there were a bunch of experts, people working in mental health that breathed a collective sigh of relief or gratitude because it's not an easy topic to address. Can you tell me why you went into writing this book?
Absolutely. I started my career as a primary school teacher, but I only taught for 4 years. And when I left teaching, I had this really big passion to be in the wellbeing space and to help kids stay connected to school. So for the next 25 years, I built a charity and I ended up with a psychology clinic. It was quite a multidisciplinary space. So we had counsellors and psychologists, social workers and mentors. I worked as a mentor, but I found that self-harm was something that was notoriously difficult to treat.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting a lot of referrals from psychologists and psychiatrists and GPs. And I really found it was all about connecting with the uniqueness of that child and really helping them with the next best step forward. So it became kind of like a bit of my specialty area, even though I'm not medically trained. I was a mentor with a teaching background.
I find that incredible because you tend to be the voice in Australia. I see at seminars, we've spoken at conferences together, and you are the person that is always called up to speak about self-harm. And I think there's been such a need for frank conversations on this topic. I, for one, was looking for something hopeful to give parents. And I actually have had a bunch of your books where I simply bought them and handed them over to parents at the end of my seminars to actually give them something hopeful because I saw the desperation, and it's not a conversation I could have in 5 minutes at the end of a seminar. So just thank you for writing this resource. So let's just start off. Could you just explain the term self-harm?
Okay. So non-suicidal self-harm is when someone deliberately hurts themselves in an attempt to express or cope or control emotional pain. So it's a bit of an emotional regulation strategy, really. It can also be used as a form of self-punishment as well. It's really hard for us as, I guess, sometimes caring adults to get our minds around. Why would my child want to hurt themselves? It's really difficult. When I see a tween or a teen self-harming, it pulls out of me this sense of compassion, but also this defiance in equal measures. It's compassion for the distress and the discomfort they're in, but also this defiance that it won't dominate and control and limit their potential going forward. And we know that young people typically experiment with self-harm in those middle school years. And it's no wonder, Collett. I mean, they've got these big, overwhelming emotions. They often see it as a form of being able to cope with what's going on. So they try it out, but it doesn't solve problems. And I think that's the thing that young people often quite quickly come to the realization of. It doesn't solve their problems. It often compounds them.
As parents, it is so important to remind ourselves that it is completely normal and healthy for our teenagers to want some form of control and even separation from us as their parents. Many teenagers feel like they are utterly invincible. This can sometimes look like taking an occasional risk that even their parents might not take or might not quite like. But self-harm is a different set of criteria that we're looking at. Self-harm often comes from a place of distress, whether it's from a mental illness or a trauma or psychological pain. And some of our teens find that the physical pain or the risk-taking behaviors help provide a temporary relief from that emotional pain. It can become compulsive and a dangerous activity, and these are the unhealthy forms of emotional regulation. In your book, you talk about the different types of self-harm, and one I would love you to focus on is digital self-harm. This is something I came across as a school counsellor. It could have been about 10 years ago. The first time it kind of presented itself to me in my office and with the school, and it was kind of a shock that this even had a term, that it was called digital self-harm. And it became more commonplace, I think, when social media was something that a lot of young people began to use and mobile phones became more commonplace in classrooms and schools and so on. So just expand on particularly digital self-harm and then some of the forms for us.
So it's intention rather than behaviour that defines self-harm. And I think if anyone who's worked with young people for a long time, you know, self-harm's often talked about in the form of cutting or burning, and maybe we're looking for signs of that on a child's body, although they are very good at hiding it. But the reality is that there's a lot of behaviours that young people can use to regulate emotions and deliberately hurt themselves with. Unprotected sex is one that we don't often talk about or think about. Train surfing, jumping off high heights. Sometimes with our boys, we assume that boys don't self-harm, but we don't recognise that some of these culturally acceptable behaviours are things that boys have learnt to regulate their emotions with. But digital self-harm is when a young person creates a fake profile and uses that profile to bully themselves or harm their online presence. So they might take that fake profile and say, you know, I can't believe you said that to such and such today, or I hate you, or
you're so ugly, you're so fat. Yeah.
That's right. And, you know, what are you even doing alive, or any number of things. Now, what the research really tells us is that often young people are using that as a very quick way to gauge their social relationships and where they stand, because when someone's bullied, you either align with the bully or you align with the person being bullied. So it's a very quick way for them to draw that comparison.
Yeah, of where they stand and who their friends are or not. Yeah. I'm so glad you discussed boys and self-harm in the way they present, because we often miss that. A lot of behaviours that some boys engage in, the risky behaviours, we don't actually recognize that some of those things are self-harm. So thank you for bringing that up. Can you also talk to us about what some of the warning signs are that we might need to look out for in self-harm?
Okay. Stress plus something equals relief for all of us, okay? So there's none of us that are exempt from that equation. I don't know about you, Collett, but I mean, sometimes stress plus a whole packet of Tim Tams does it for me, half a tub of ice cream. There can be all sorts of things I use to fill in that blank.
Look, caramel is my chocolate of choice, but anyhow.
There you go. So there's just such a variety of ways that we manage stress in life. Research tells us that mental health is very strongly linked to self-harm behavior. So I think all the typical signs that we might look out for when it comes to mental health are the same signs we look out for when it comes to self-harm. There's some extra ones like kids wearing jumpers in summer and wanting to hide maybe parts of their body that they would usually be, quite free and open about showing to the world. Not wanting to be seen in swimmers. And sometimes young people do cut in those crevices of their armpits or their legs, which are hidden with normal clothes, but maybe not so much when they're swimming. Sharp objects missing, sharp objects in their pencil case, spots of blood on the bedroom or bathroom floor, little things like that. And the other thing that I noticed is talk of other kids self-harming. And the other thing was sometimes when I went to reach out and touch a child, they would sort of recoil back a little bit because underneath where I couldn't see, there was a wound that subconsciously they were not wanting anyone to touch. So it's just those little gestures sometimes that you become attuned to when you're working with kids all the time.
I'm glad you brought up the talk of other kids self-harming, because sometimes that can be the warning that they're trying to tell you
Absolutely.
that they are experimenting with or engaging in self-harming and trying to reach out. They won't often come out and just tell you. They're afraid of what you as a parent or as a teacher or a counsellor might say. Michelle, also, could you just chat to us a little bit about, I know a common question that I get is, if my child is self-harming, are they at risk of suicide? So I know you'll get that question a lot. So could you just talk us through that?
And I've had mums grab my hand and just say, why does my child want to die? And I have to really reassure them that self-harm can run completely separately than suicidal ideation or thoughts. It can.
Yes.
It used to be thought that self-harm and suicide were on a continuum, and if not treated well, that self-harm would escalate and become suicide. It's not believed that anymore. It's a way of them wanting to get through their day. It's a way of them wanting to cope. And I think that's really important for parents to know. Can we say this though, Collett? In my work over the years, I've realised that suicide can be very unpredictable, and there is obviously a higher connection with young people who are self-harming.
According to Lifeline, self-harm can be a predictor of suicide, although some young people who self-harm do not have thoughts or intentions of dying. However, even if they don't mean to, the risk of accidental death is very real, and some people find the behavior compulsive. So asking your young person if they have considered suicide is an important conversation to have. Although as parents, we are often too close to an issue, and that is when we need to seek professional help. Michelle, what do you think about the idea that we often hear, it's just attention-seeking behavior, just leave them alone, or talk to us about that term when we hear from other teenagers or adults calling it simply attention-seeking?
When we sweep things under the carpet, we don't give kids the opportunity to use what they're going through as a learning experience. And I think so oftentimes we don't want to accept what's happening. As a parent, it can be very overwhelming. But even in the school setting, Collett, no one really wants to talk about it or really embrace this subject. And I think when we do sweep it under the carpet, what kids miss out on is the ability to learn and grow through what they're going through. So we can reframe attention seeking a little bit, and I'm not at all suggesting there is not an element where kids are not wanting to get our attention, and what on earth is wrong with that anyway. But they're really asking us to connect with them, to see us, to hear us, to accept them, to show delight in them. They want us to understand them as well, consider and really respond to my needs. Even things like help me organize and validate these crazy thoughts. Be really curious about what's going on for me. And the third one that I don't think we talk about enough is the need our kids have for us to protect them in those moments. So they're actually looking for a healthy attachment. They're saying, see my extreme distress and the different ways I'm trying to express it. Help me regulate, help me feel safe. And I think instead of saying kids are wanting attention, if we as parents realize they're actually wanting us to step up as that big caring, compassionate person in their life, and sometimes put boundaries around them until they are feeling safe and held.
Yeah. And that can be really confronting to do. And I know I often say to parents, you need to then be getting your own support and your own help, seeing your own counselor or psychologist so that you can deal with your emotions separately and privately, because in that moment with your child is not when you should be dealing with your stuff. And if you do, I know you're a big advocate of this, if you do, apologize and say, look, I messed up. I didn't deal with it really well when you came and spoke to me about the fact that you were self-harming. Can I do it over? Can we do this better? Michelle, have you seen any stats around changes in self-harming during COVID, or, I mean, I don't want to say post-COVID because we're still in it kind of as an endemic really, but has there been much change that you've seen in the statistics around self-harm?
Yeah, absolutely have. Let's focus internationally and then let's look at Australia a little bit. I think in general, it's probably been accepted that around about 10% of young people will experiment with self-harm. But the research from that actually comes from GP clinics or medical practices, young people who show up to hospitals, because it's in those regulated spaces where we're collecting research. Crazily enough, there's some community studies that are showing stats are a lot higher than that. And in some cases around that 25 to 27%. Now, this was before COVID. What's actually happened since COVID is some of the latest stats coming out of the UK are around 27% of kids fronting up for medical support after self-harming. That is a massive rise. It's unbelievable. And Headspace, I did notice that they're really identifying these tween girls as being our highest risk demographic during COVID. So if you're looking at a girl between the ages, say 11 and 14, I'd say, or 10 or 14, they seem to be coming up as the highest risk.
Do you have any thoughts on what drove that at all? I mean, obviously there might be anecdotal thoughts, but do you have any thoughts around that?
I just think increased time on our own is not good for any of our mental health.
Yeah.
I mean, it's isolation that exasperates poor mental health. And I know we always tend to, as adults, want to blame one thing, don't we? I know, Collett, when my kids are not going well, we want to blame that one teacher, that one boyfriend, that, that one experience when they were a child, the way my husband said that to them at that particular time. We want to latch onto that one thing, but the reality is it's not one thing. It's often a combination of things that really knocks our kids. And there is that tipping point where the one thing can become the most significant thing, but it's never just an isolated incident. I think with COVID, it has been that tipping point for a lot of kids. Yeah. And the other thing we need to really acknowledge is they've had so much more time online. Yeah. And I don't know if you've been on TikTok lately, but I certainly try and go on it, and it's just increasingly concerning me.
Yeah, me too.
And the information young people have access to. And let's put ourselves in their shoes. At 13, 14, 15-year-olds, who wouldn't go seeking for a community that understands them? I mean, none of our parents understand us at that age. It's not like we don't go seek out mum and dad, but we're looking for a community of people that understand us. And then what happens is young people are maybe getting offered suggestions or ideas that they can experiment with. That's a really, really dangerous space for our kids to be in when they're not supervised online at all and they've got poor mental health.
We often refer to that as contagion, really. We've been speaking about this issue with contagion for ages, just the platform changes. At the moment it's TikTok, before it was Kick Messenger and whatever the latest thing was, depending on when your child is born or entering social media phases. But you're right. A lot of the times they go onto these spaces and they're looking for a community, but they end up getting more ideas, which can be quite dangerous. And then again, that speaks into a lot of other areas we've spoken about on this podcast, in terms of monitoring and cyber safety and so on. So you just heard me use a term, contagion. Contagion really just means when something becomes normalized, and particularly for teenagers, it's when they're seeing a whole lot of self-harm depicted on social media or on TV shows, and they think, well, maybe that will work for me in my situation. I might give it a try. Another question parents often ask me is, what are some things that we should do and what should we avoid when talking with our teens who are self-harming? I want to actually first just start with reading from your book on self-harm. I found this section, The Power of Belonging, just beautiful. You said, ideally, a sense of belonging is something that should underpin every child's life. Research suggests that young people who are brought up with a strong sense of belonging have less risk of engaging in other harmful behaviors. Belonging is a strong protection against mental health and a powerful motivator to keep them on track. People who belong have a better sense of motivation and happiness. So can you just give some advice for the parent who's listening? What could they say to their teenager who they suspect or they know is self-harming? Talk to us a little bit about this belonging, but also helping parents support their child when they suspect their child might be self-harming.
The first thing I want parents to do is process their emotions away from their child. And if that literally means you have to go and book in with a psychologist and just talk it out, it can wait for a day or 2 or 3 until you feel like you're in a good space to address it. Because what we don't want this to be is an emotion dump on a child who's already struggling. There's things that repel kids. And we know this even in our practice teaching, Collett. Harsh judgments, overreactions. I mean, yes, as a mother, how many times has that put my sons off talking to me because I've overreacted about something? Just any type of shame. That's just not helpful. Also, a lack of education, so a lack of understanding of the topic as well. And sometimes we've got a little bit of homework to do before we come and talk to our child.
What I might add to this are some of Lifeline's recommendations. Things like don't panic and become angry with your child when you discover they're self-harming. Don't reject your teen. Don't ignore the problem as if it's not there. Also, don't condone self-injury. Also, try not give ultimatums or pressure your teen into treatments that they're not comfortable with. If you have done any of these things, just apologize. It's okay to start over. And like Michelle said, get some support for yourself first. And then things that we can do that are life-giving. Use non-judgmental and supportive language when you talk to your teenager. Practice listening first so they feel heard and they feel supported. Try to remain calm and focus on supporting your teen and help them find better ways to cope. Encouraging them to seek help from a doctor or a health professional, and perhaps suggest options for getting help and letting your teen be part of the decisions about their own course of treatment. When they look for coping strategies, Lifeline suggests the 3 Ds. These are delay, so helping your teen put off self-harming behaviors until they have spoken to someone. The second D is deep breathing or using other healthy relaxation methods. And the third D is distract, doing exercise, going for a walk, play a game, do something kind for yourself, play loud music, or use positive coping strategies. Michelle has some further ideas about healthy ways we can interact with our teen who is self-harming, and a beautiful example of a coping kit.
Do anything that adds hope in the equation and tips the scales in their favour. And developing a coping kit can be something that works really well. It can be a simple box where young people get to choose a collection of things that will help them in the moment, that things that either can be constructive or comforting, that can give them hope or inspire them. They can have phone numbers of people that they could reach out to. They could also have, emotional regulation, those little toys that they use, journals, drawing, candles, fluffy socks, bath bubbles, a soccer ball, whatever works. Get them out of their mind and back into their body and ground them.
And getting them alongside choosing what works for them. Fluffy socks might not be their thing, but jumping on the trampoline might be. That's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, it empowers them a little bit, but what I need them to know is there's not going to be someone there every time that they need someone there. So they need strategies for when they are alone in the same way as they need strategies for when they are at school or when family is home or professionals are accessible. I think the number one thing that parents need to realize when they talk to their child for the first time, it's not what they say. It's not about getting it perfect. A lot of the things that we kind of maybe rehearse and think were life-shattering really aren't. It's the tone of that conversation that matters. And the biggest thing that they need to hear is there's nothing that we can't get through together, that I am on your team, that you and me right now are going to walk this journey together. And if it takes a day or a week or some months or some years, I'm going to be right here by your side. Also, every child deserves, not needs. There's a really big shift in those words, professional support. So instead of saying to a child, look, we really need to get you into a psychologist and sort of indicating that they've got a big problem, it's like you really deserve support to get through this. And I want to make sure that you get the absolute best to help you journey through this.
Today's topic was quite difficult, but what I really appreciated was Michelle's focus on terminology that is compassionate. She said, every child deserves professional help rather than every child needs professional help. That was just beautiful. If you would like to know more about Michelle's work on supporting teens who self-harm, you can find her at michellemitchell.org. If you found yourself feeling distressed at any point of this episode, for Australian listeners, please call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or your local helpline if you are elsewhere around the world. Please also refer to the numbers that we have provided in the show notes of this episode. You can also find me or leave a question for a future episode at raisingteenagers.com.au or via the Raising Teens page at hopepodcast.com.au. Please subscribe and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love to see you next episode, and in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
This episode was hosted by Collett Smart, edited and produced by Alec Green, imaging by Lucy Weil, and social media by Beth Rivers.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.